Imagine for a second, just, picture this in your mind. You are standing on a massive construction site.
Right.
And you're looking up at what is supposed to be this towering, 100-story skyscraper. But as you watch the crews working, you notice something is deeply, deeply wrong. I mean, the workers are confused, the materials don't match, people are running into each other.
Sounds like a total mess.
Oh, it's chaos. And then you see the root of the problem. There are two head architects on the site.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, standing on opposite ends of the lot, just shouting completely conflicting orders through megaphones. Architect A is holding a blueprint for this flexible steel cable suspension bridge. So he's ordering the crew to, lay down high-tension wire and build anchor blocks.
Right, something that needs tension and flex.
Exactly. But Architect B is holding a blueprint for a rigid, heavy stone medieval fortress.
Okay, totally different physics.
Completely. She's ordering the crew to pour thick concrete and stack these unyielding granite blocks. And the kicker is, both architects have been given absolute equal authority over the construction crew.
Well, you don't need an engineering degree to know exactly what happens next in that scenario.
You really don't. The concrete shatters under the conflicting tension of the cables. The steel beams warp because, well, they aren't designed to hold the static weight of solid granite.
Right.
The entire structure basically tears itself apart before it even reaches the second floor. It is total, unavoidable structural chaos.
Yeah, I mean, the building doesn't just fail to get built, it actively destroys itself. You absolutely cannot have two ultimate conflicting authorities dictating the fundamental physics of a single unified structure.
It's impossible.
The mathematics of stress and load-bearing and, material science, they simply do not allow for it.
Yeah.
Any attempt to blend fundamentally opposed operating principles, it will always result in a collapse under the weight of its own internal contradictions.
Right. And you would never build a skyscraper that way. No rational person would look at that construction site and say, yeah, this seems like a solid plan.
Buddy.
Yet we are currently trying to build human civilization using that exact same doomed blueprint.
We really are. We think we can have multiple architects with completely conflicting rule books running our political systems, our economies, our social structures, and somehow, by some miracle, the building won't collapse.
It's wild. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking an incredibly dense, highly analytical lecture today. This is lecture 3 out of 13 from the Tului Islam digital audio series, and we're focusing specifically on Surah Al-Anbiya, verses 21.21 through 24.
Which is such a fascinating section of text.
It is, but we have to start by just completely obliterating a placeholder myth that has clouded this specific text for, centuries, really.
Yes, please, let's clear the air on that immediately.
Right. So if you grew up with conventional historical readings of these verses, you probably learned that they are this simple, almost primitive theological scolding. Like, it's directed at ancient pagans who worshipped carved stone idols or, multiple gods living up in the clouds.
Yeah, that conventional reading paints this incredibly reductive picture. It treats the text as if it's merely addressing primitive superstitions, almost as if the author is just saying, hey, stop bowing to that piece of carved rock.
Right, like a basic history lesson about mythology.
Exactly. And treating this text as just ancient mythology is a classic oversimplification. And honestly, worse than that, it completely misses the geopolitical and structural genius of what is actually being communicated here.
Oh, for sure.
What we have in these 4 verses is not a critique of ancient art or primitive pantheons. It is a masterclass in systems theory. It is this radical, timeless critique of fractured sociopolitical authority.
And I want to dive straight into the linguistic mechanics of this, because the source material does something brilliant with the language that completely shifts how we have to look at modern power. Let's look at verse 21 and zero in on one specific word, which is aliha.
Right, Leah.
Yeah, traditionally people translate this as gods or idols, and the moment we hear that, our brains instantly picture marble statues of Zeus or Apollo sitting in a temple somewhere.
Which is so unhelpful for understanding the actual meaning.
Totally unhelpful. But the lecturer in our source material strips away that mythological baggage. So if an Ayla, which is the singular form of Aliha, if it isn't just a stone statue, what is the actual systemic definition we are dealing with here?
Okay, so the systemic definition is chillingly precise, and it has absolutely nothing to do with mythology. And ILO is any entity that claims absolute, unchallengeable authority over others.
Wow, okay.
Right. It is anyone or any institution or any system that arrogates to itself the right to write arbitrary rules and then demands unquestioning compliance from human beings.
Because it's about power.
It's entirely about power. The text is specifically talking about earthly power. When the source breaks down verse 21, it highlights the phrase Alihatan minul ar, which literally translates to earthbound sovereigns.
Earthbound, not in the sky.
Exactly. It is not talking about the sky. It is talking about the ground we walk on. These earthbound sovereigns are human tyrants. They are corrupt oligarchs, unaccountable lawmakers, dictators. It even includes religious clergies who claim a divine mandate to dictate human destiny.
Basically, anyone trying to play architect with human lives.
Yes, they try to architect our social, our economic, and political structures based purely on their own whims, and then they demand that the rest of humanity simply bow down and obey.
I am so glad we are making this distinction because, you know, when people think Aliha just means stone idols, it gives them this false sense of modern enlightenment.
Oh, exactly. We think we're so advanced.
Right. We look around our cities, we don't see temples to Zeus, and we say, well, we don't worship statues anymore. We've outgrown that whole phase of human history. We feel perfectly safe from the critique.
But we aren't safe at all.
Not at all. Because if an ilah is an earthbound sovereign, a corrupt institution, an oligarchy, a financial system that operates without any moral baseline, then you suddenly realize the modern world is absolutely infested with them.
It's crawling with them.
We are surrounded by Alihatan Minal art. We haven't outgrown the problem, we just changed the packaging.
We have merely upgraded the aesthetics of our submission. That's all we've done. We swapped out marble statues for political and economic structures that demand the exact same unquestioning obedience. We submit our time, our labor, our societal values to these modern sovereigns without a second thought.
Yeah, we just punch the clock and obey.
And the text anticipates this, which brings us to the profound structural consequence of having these multiple earthbound sovereigns competing for control. Verse 22 introduces a specific outcome, which is fasadata.
Okay, let's unpack that word, because traditional translations of fasadata usually offer something poetic but incredibly vague, like saying the heavens and the earth would go to ruin.
Which sounds like a fairy tale.
It really does. Going to ruin sounds like a curse cast by a wizard in a fantasy novel. It doesn't sound scientific. But the source lecture treats this as a mechanistic certainty. So what is the precise structural definition of this ruin?
Right, so the linguistic root of fasad literally means structural disintegration or systemic corruption. It is the exact opposite of cohesive functioning.
Okay.
The source uses a brilliant analogy to explain this, which we can kind of update to make the mechanics even clearer for a modern listener. Think about the device you're using to listen to this deep dive right now.
A phone or a laptop.
Yeah. Imagine you have this highly advanced piece of computer hardware. Now, instead of installing one cohesive operating system, you somehow manage to install two completely different, competing master operating systems. Let's say you force Windows and Mac OS onto it at the exact same time.
Oh, man.
And you force them to run simultaneously, granting both of them equal, absolute root-level authority over the hardware.
So they both think they own the RAM. They both are trying to dictate how the processor schedules tasks.
Exactly.
They're both trying to control the thermal management system.
And what happens to that computer? It doesn't just run a little slower. It doesn't just get glitchy. It experiences a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure.
It bricks itself.
It crashes entirely. That crash, that complete inability to function because the hardware is receiving conflicting authoritative commands, that is fasadata.
That reframes everything. Fasad isn't some magical punishment falling from the sky because a deity got jealous. It's a systemic inevitability. If you tell a system to move left and move right at the exact same moment with absolute force, the system simply tears itself apart.
Precisely. If you have one unified universe, one cohesive physical and biological reality, it fundamentally requires one unified law to function. The moment you introduce multiple absolute authorities, you are injecting contradictory parameters into the source code.
Which guarantees a crash.
Yes. Whether that system is a single living cell, a solar system, or a complex human society, the logic holds completely true. You cannot have two ultimate authorities without structural disintegration.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Because modern secular societies would argue that we don't explicitly claim to have multiple gods running our political systems. We pride ourselves on being very rational.
Well, we love to call ourselves rational.
Right. We say we have compartmentalized our lives beautifully. We have science for the physical world, we have politics for the social world, and we keep religion in a neat little box for the weekends. How does the text respond to that kind of, aggressive compartmentalization?
Well, the source text diagnoses that exact compartmentalization as the core hypocrisy of the modern era.
Wow. Core hypocrisy.
Absolutely. It calls out what we might term secular dualism. Modern society has engineered this massive, completely artificial divide in how we view authority. On one hand, humanity is perfectly happy to accept a God of the heavens, right?
Meaning physical laws.
Yes. We accept that there is a unified, unbreakable set of laws governing the physical universe.
Right.
We accept gravity, thermodynamics, planetary motion. We can see that the cosmos is a singular, mathematically precise system.
But the moment we look down at the earth, we suddenly change the rules entirely. When it comes to human life, our economies, our justice systems, our political structures, we completely reject the idea that there is a God of the earth.
We throw the concept out the window.
We reject the notion that there are universal, immutable socio-political laws that we have to align with. The modern secular worldview basically says, hey, the sky belongs to physics, but the earth belongs to us. We will invent our own arbitrary rules down here based on whatever the current power structure desires.
And the lecture points to another verse to dismantle this dualism. It brings in Surah 43.84, which explicitly states that the unified authority is exactly the same in the heavens as it is on the earth.
It's not divided.
No, it is one continuous, unbroken continuum. By claiming that human intellect alone, completely disconnected from any universal moral baseline, is entirely sufficient to run society, while simultaneously keeping the concept of ultimate authority strictly confined to private personal rituals. Humanity is essentially practicing a sophisticated form of polytheism.
We are splitting reality into two distinct jurisdictions. We're literally telling the universe, you have zero jurisdiction over human affairs. We got this.
And by doing so, we are appointing ourselves as the new Al-Liha. We are the earthbound sovereigns. We are saying the universe can have the stars, but we have absolute authority over human society.
Which is the definition of arrogance.
It is. And according to the systemic logic we just established, this dualism leads directly to fasad. You cannot have the physical hardware of the world running on one set of immutable laws and the software of human society running on a completely different, arbitrary, often contradictory set of rules invented by whoever happens to hold political power that decade.
The analogy the lecturer brings up here, it perfectly captures how cynical this division actually is. The 12th man metaphor.
Oh, it's such a good analogy.
It really is. Let's dwell on this because it highlights exactly how modern society treats ultimate authority. So think about a sports team playing a crucial match, like a soccer or cricket team. You have your starting 11 players out on the field.
The ones actually doing the work.
Exactly. They are running the plays, they're executing the strategy, touching the ball, determining the actual outcome of the game. But then you have the extra player, the reserve player, sitting on the bench, the 12th man.
Right. And what is the functional role of that 12th man during the normal flow of the game?
Absolutely nothing. They just sit there in a tracksuit. They don't dictate the flow of the match at all. They are completely outside the mechanics of the game. The coach and the starting players only ever look at the 12th man if there is an emergency. Like if someone breaks a leg or gets completely exhausted, or if they just need someone to run out onto the field with some water bottles, then they pull the 12th man off the bench.
And the source material argues that this is precisely how modern secular society treats the concept of a unified cosmic law. We treat it exactly like a reserve player on the bench.
We literally say human-made capitalism, human-made politics, human-made social hierarchies. You guys are the starting 11.
Yeah, you're the starters.
You run the actual mechanics of society. You dictate who gets food, who gets shelter, who goes to prison. God, ultimate law, universal morality sit on the bench. We will only call you when there's a personal tragedy, or when we need a comforting funeral ritual, or when a massive natural disaster hits. We flatly refuse to let the unified law govern the actual day-to-day mechanics of the societal game.
When you look closely at how the coach, meaning the earthbound sovereigns, uses that 12th man, you realize it is entirely manipulative.
It's incredibly cynical.
The lecture provides this fascinating historical example of this exact dynamic playing out on a massive geopolitical scale during the 20th century.
Oh, the Cold War example. This part of the source material completely rewired how I view historical propaganda. Bring down the mechanics of this for us because it's brilliant.
Let's analyze the geopolitical landscape during the rise of global communism. The Soviet bloc emerged with this economic and political ideology seeking global dominance, and their central rallying cry was famously, "Workers of the world, unite." This was a direct, earthly challenge to the existing capitalist structures of the West. It threatened their monopolies, their resource extraction, their global hegemony.
Now, how did the Western capitalist powers actually respond to that? They didn't just argue supply and demand economics. They didn't just counter with, hey, capitalists of the world, unite, because, well, that wouldn't inspire the working class masses in their own countries to fight and die in proxy wars.
Exactly. That wouldn't work at all.
Yeah.
Instead, they countered with a completely different slogan. They essentially broadcast the call, "Believers in God, unite."
Wow.
They framed the entire Cold War not as an economic struggle over earthly resources, but as a holy war against atheism.
But wait, didn't the West actually believe they were the good guys defending faith? I mean, it's easy to look back now and say it was just a branding exercise, but surely there was genuine ideological conviction there.
Oh, of course. Millions of everyday citizens held genuine, deeply felt convictions. But the source text asks us to look at the mechanics of the systems those superpowers were running. Were the Western powers actually submitting their own economic or political systems to a unified cosmic law?
Not a chance.
Were they aligning their banking sectors, their foreign policies, or their intelligence agencies with universal moral principles of equity and justice? Absolutely not. Their starting 11 on the field was still purely earthly, cutthroat capitalist dominance, often propped up by exploiting developing nations.
So they were just using the label of belief as a political shield.
Precisely. They saw the communist bloc threatening their earthly empires. So they looked over at the bench, grabbed the concept of God, and threw a jersey on it. Not to actually govern their society with the divine principles, but to use the brand of belief as a weapon.
To rally the troops.
Yeah. They used it to rally their populations, to demonize the enemy, and to protect their own status as earthbound sovereigns. And notice, once the political utility was over, the 12th man went right back to the bench, and the exploitative economic policies continued unabated. They turned the very idea of a unified cosmic system into just another earthly tool for geopolitical dominance.
It is the ultimate manipulation. You bring the reserve player off the bench just to throw a punch for you, and then you sit him right back down so you can keep running your corrupt plays.
It's dark, but it's true.
It reveals that belief in this context is totally detached from actually implementing a unified system. It's just a mascot. And this cynical, manipulative use of belief by political systems is sharply contrasted in the lecture with the profound, awe-inspiring realizations coming from the world of hard science.
Yes, this intersection of the physics of belief versus the laws of nature is really where the structural argument of the text reaches its peak. The source material references Sir Arthur Stanley Eddington to make this point.
Let's talk about Eddington.
Eddington was a titan of early 20th century physics and astronomy. He was the scientist who actually traveled to Principe in 1919 to observe a solar eclipse, providing the very first empirical proof of Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity.
Right. So he wasn't a philosopher just musing about the stars. He was a man steeped in the absolute highest levels of rigorous scientific inquiry.
He was measuring the foundational math of reality. And what did Eddington and scientists of his caliber actually realize when they looked at the cosmos?
Well, when they studied the expansion of the universe or the behavior of light bending around stars, the intricate structure of atoms, they didn't see randomness.
No, they didn't.
They didn't see a chaotic battlefield of competing forces trying to assert dominance. They recognized an undeniable, flawless intelligence. They saw a unified, singular set of mathematical laws governing every single particle in the physical universe, from the largest galaxy cluster down to the smallest quark.
They saw a reality operating on a singular, perfect operating system.
But here is where the source material points out a massive, almost inexplicable cognitive dissonance in the modern human mind. Let's unpack the friction here, because it exposes the core arrogance of human civilization.
It really does. Because if human beings, especially our brightest scientific minds, can look through telescopes and microscopes and recognize that the physical universe operates on an immutable, perfectly balanced, unified set of laws, how can we possibly justify the belief that human socioeconomic systems can operate on flawed, arbitrary human-made laws without facing a systemic crash.
It is absolute blinding arrogance. It's as if we acknowledge the flawless genius of the universe in every single domain except our own human affairs. We accept that we cannot legislate the speed of light. We accept that no matter how powerful a politician is, they cannot pass a bill in Congress to alter the laws of thermodynamics.
Physical laws are entirely deaf to human lobbying.
Yes.
A magnetic field will not change its polarity just because it is inconvenient for a corporation's quarterly earnings report.
Exactly. But the moment we pivot to the laws of human social balance, economics, and justice, we suddenly act like we are gods. We believe we can just invent the rules as we go along, based on whatever the earthbound sovereigns happen to desire today, and somehow escape the physics of cause and effect.
It's delusion.
Think about the process of building an airplane. When aerospace engineers design a Boeing or an Airbus, they are absolutely subservient to the immutable laws of aerodynamics. They calculate lift, drag, thrust, weight with terrifying mathematical precision. If they ignore those laws even by a fraction of a percent, the plane doesn't fly. It crashes and people die. They submit entirely to the unified physical law.
They have no choice. The physical law dictates the boundaries of their reality.
Right. But imagine if, once that mathematically perfect plane is built and flying at 30,000 feet, the passengers decide they are bored with the rules. They don't like the feeling of turbulence, or they think the descent is taking too long, so they hold a democratic vote in the cabin. They pass a resolution stating that gravity should now pull sideways instead of down, and that thrust should be generated by positive vibes instead of highly combustible jet fuel.
It sounds like an absurd sketch comedy premise.
It is absurd because you cannot vote against physics, no matter how unanimous the vote is. No matter how passionately the passengers believe in their new rules, the plane will stall, drop out of the sky, and crash.
Yep.
And yet, this is exactly what the source text is arguing we do with our societies every single day. We trust the immutable laws of aerodynamics for our machines, but we let politicians, oligarchs, and fleeting cultural trends hold a vote on the fundamental laws of human social balance.
We vote on things that are mathematically predetermined.
Yes, we vote to implement economic systems built on endless compounding debt and the exploitation of the working class. We vote to implement political systems built on tribal division and tyranny, and then we are genuinely shocked we act like it's an unpredictable tragedy when the society crashes. When we experience facade,
We refuse to accept that there is a physics to human society, just as there is a physics to the natural world. The lecture delves deeply into this concept of social physics, focusing on how the consequences of human actions are mathematically absolute. And this brings us to a crucial reinterpretation of a very famous phrase in the text.
Okay, I'm going to throw up a huge stop sign here because I have a major problem with verse 23 based on traditional translations.
I know exactly which one you mean.
The verse says, "He cannot be questioned about what he does, but they will be questioned." Now, if I am a modern listener raised with democratic ideals, that phrase sounds incredibly alarming.
Oh, it bristles.
It sounds exactly like an autocratic dictator. I don't answer to anyone, but you all answer to me. It sounds like a tyrant who refuses to be audited, a king who demands blind obedience and accountability from his subjects while remaining totally unaccountable himself. How is that not just defending a cosmic dictator?
Right. And if you are viewing God as a human-like king sitting on a throne in the sky, that verse is absolutely terrifying, and your objection is completely valid. But the lecture in the source material completely rejects that dictator paradigm. That is a fundamental misreading of the text.
Okay, so correct my reading.
Because, as we established earlier, we're not talking about a king, we are talking about systems theory. We must view this verse purely through the lens of social physics.
Break that down for me. How does viewing this through social physics change the meaning of "he cannot be questioned"?
Well, let's go back to the laws of nature we just discussed. Can you put the law of gravity on trial?
No. You can't issue a subpoena to gravity.
Can you bargain with the first law of thermodynamics? Can you drag a tsunami into a courtroom and demand it explain its actions?
Obviously not. Natural laws don't give testimony.
Right. They cannot be questioned, adjusted, bargained with, or put on trial by human beings. They are mathematically absolute. They simply are. They execute precisely based on their parameters.
Okay, I'm tracking.
And the source text argues that the exact same absolutism applies to the fundamental laws governing human society, what the lecturer calls the law of requital, or the law of cause and effect in human actions.
The law of requital. So this is the idea that every single action, every societal structure inherently carries its own inevitable consequence, just like every physical action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly. Let's trace the causal chain to see how a societal audit actually works mechanically.
Right.
If a society builds an economic system based on exploitation, say, hoarding wealth at the very top, while the base of the society cannot afford basic necessities, that society is violating the fundamental law of systemic balance and human equity.
They are putting immense stress on the structural steel of the civilization.
Yes. It's just like the construction site analogy from the beginning. You can ignore the stress for a while, you can pretend the building is fine, but the physics are constantly calculating the breaking point.
The math is always running.
The hoarding of wealth reduces circulation, which decreases purchasing power, which leads to mass poverty, which leads to social unrest, which leads to the state using authoritarian violence to maintain control.
And eventually, the friction becomes too great, and the society collapses into revolution or ruin. It experiences facade.
Exactly. And here is the crucial point of verse 23. When that collapse happens, the society cannot sue the universe. It cannot drag the law of requital into court and say, this is unfair. We voted for this economic system. We passed laws making this legal.
You can't audit the law of requital.
A society cannot audit the law of requital. The law of requital audits the society. That is what he cannot be questioned, but they will be questioned actually means.
Oh, wow.
The universal law of cause and effect does not answer to human legislation. But every piece of human legislation, every social structure, every economic policy will be violently, ruthlessly audited by the mathematical reality of that universal law. If you build on a foundation of tyranny, you cannot escape the math. You simply pay the price of structural disintegration.
That is so chillingly precise. It removes all the emotional, mythological baggage of a wrathful deity throwing lightning bolts to punish people and replaces it with the cold, hard math of cause and effect. You jump off a cliff, you hit the ground. It's not a punishment from gravity, it's a consequence.
Exactly.
You build a society on oppression, it shatters. It's not divine retribution in a human sense, it's a systemic audit.
It's just physics.
But, and here's the rub, if the math is this absolute, it raises a massive, almost tragic question about human nature. Because if these universal laws are so undeniable, and if the consequences of ignoring them are so consistently catastrophic throughout human history, why do we keep ignoring them?
It's the great paradox.
Why do human beings so consistently, predictably choose to submit to flawed, arbitrary human-made systems? Why do we keep electing the earthbound sovereigns when we know their blueprints are fundamentally flawed?
That's the perfect transition, because I want to call this final section the engine of reason. The text turns its focus inward onto the psychology of the human mind. We are shining the spotlight on the end of verse 24, where the text observes this tragic reality. It says that most people do not know the truth and choose to turn away. The Arabic phrase used is phanam muranum.
Murian, what exactly does that mean in a systemic context?
Murian means turning away, actively ignoring, avoiding the reality. It implies a deliberate avoidance of the truth.
So why do people willingly, actively submit to broken systems and turn away from unified laws? What is the psychology driving this submission?
The source material highlights a well-known, deeply ingrained psychological reality. It's our biological reliance on cognitive shortcuts.
Oh, I see.
Thinking critically takes calories, it takes time. It is historically and psychologically comfortable to just follow the crowd, to obey the established authority, to do what has always been done.
It takes a massive amount of mental energy to constantly question the foundation of your reality. I mean, think about the sheer exhaustion of critical thought. If you have to wake up every single day and analyze whether your economic system is mathematically viable, whether your political leaders are aligned with universal moral laws, whether your cultural norms are structurally sound, you'd never get out of bed.
You'd be paralyzed. Intellectual validation requires courage and stamina. It requires you to potentially alienate yourself from your tribe by questioning the foundational structures of your society.
Which is terrifying for most people.
It is profoundly easier and feels safer in the short term to accept the tyrannical dictates of self-proclaimed earthly authorities simply because they are loud, they hold institutional power, and everyone else around you seems to be obeying them. It is the path of least biological resistance to just follow the leader and turn away Morian from the difficult, exhausting work of analyzing the system.
So people bow down to the Allahatain Minal Ar, the earthbound sovereigns, not out of deep religious devotion to the state, but out of sheer mental exhaustion, cognitive laziness, and historical habit. We surrender our agency because it's easier than fighting the math.
And this is exactly where the source text delivers its most radical challenge to this submissive psychology. The text doesn't just diagnose the problem of cognitive laziness, it introduces an absolute epistemic rule to break the cycle.
Epistemology, the study of how we know what is true, it's the mechanism of validation. So what is the rule the text introduces?
The phrase in the text is hattu buranakum.
Hattu buranakum. Translate that for us.
Bring your empirical proof.
Bring your empirical proof. That is stunning. The text isn't saying, hey, just have faith. It's demanding hard evidence.
It is a profound, uncompromising demand. The text is telling humanity, do not just accept the claims of any earthly authority. Do not just bow your head because a politician in a suit, a cleric in a robe, or a billionaire with a tech empire demands it. Demand their Buran.
Show me the receipts.
Exactly. Demand their verifiably true, logical, empirical blueprint for social development.
That is actually terrifying when you really think about it. Show me the math. Because if I start demanding empirical proof for every system I live under, I don't think most of our current institutions could provide it. How do you even measure empirical proof for a social system?
You measure it by the metrics of human flourishing, equity, and the lack of structural friction. If an authority claims the right to dictate how wealth is distributed, or how justice is administered, or how power is structured, they must prove that their system aligns with the ultimate unified laws of balance. If they cannot present a logical empirical proof, if their system relies entirely on unproven assertions, emotional manipulation, historical momentum, or simply because I said so, then their claims are utterly bankrupt.
This connects so beautifully to the concept of human dignity, which the lecturer brings up by referencing another verse, Surah 3.79. True human respect, true dignity means that no human being should ever, under any circumstances, have to bow their head to the arbitrary, unproven laws of another human being.
If you are submitting to a system that cannot provide burhan, empirical proof of its alignment with universal balance, you are surrendering your fundamental human dignity. You are allowing yourselves to be ruled by the arbitrary whims of an equal. You are letting another human being play God with your life.
It is the ultimate degradation. We were not built to be subservient to flawed, crashing operating systems. If an authority cannot present a verifiably true, logical blueprint for society, its claims are bankrupt. We owe it zero obedience. True liberation, according to the systemic logic of these verses, is found in submitting only to the universe's unified, proven operating system. By aligning ourselves with the single immutable law that governs the cosmos, we are freed from the tyranny of every single earthbound sovereign who tries to claim jurisdiction over us.
It is a complete paradigm shift in how we view authority, law, and our own responsibility to interrogate the systems we live under. We must become auditors of our own reality.
We have covered a massive amount of intellectual ground today. We started with the old myth of ancient stone idols, and we dismantled it to reveal a profound systemic critique of human political systems. We've seen that the unity of law is not just a theological concept. It is the only structural reality keeping the cosmos and human civilization from spinning into absolute anarchy.
That's the core of it.
If we try to run the world with multiple conflicting authorities, we invite facade, structural disintegration. We've seen the deep hypocrisy of secular dualism, treating universal law like a 12th man on a sports bench while we let corrupt human blueprints run the actual mechanics of the field. We've recognized that you cannot hold a democratic vote against the social physics of the law of requital. The universe audits us.
It audits us every time.
And finally, we've seen that true human liberation requires demanding empirical proof, hattu buranakum, from anyone who claims authority over us, refusing to be mourned. Those who turn away from the truth out of cognitive laziness.
A unified system requires unified execution, and anything less leads to fracture. But, this raises a massive lingering question that we absolutely have to address.
What's that?
If there is a singular unified cosmic law that we must align with to prevent structural collapse, how does that law actually manifest across human history without getting diluted, corrupted, or completely distorted by human interference? How do we separate the signal from the noise when so many earthly sovereigns try to hijack the broadcast?
That is the million-dollar question right there. If the blueprint is perfect, how did it get delivered to the construction site without the architect spilling coffee all over it?
That is exactly what we're going to explore next. In Lecture 4 out of 13, covering Surah 21, verses 25 through 33, we will analyze the concept of a unified historical message. We are going to look at the physical architecture of the universe itself, tracing this singular law from the cosmic origin, the Big Bang, all the way down to the protective layers of our own atmosphere. The text is about to switch from high-level political theory to raw cosmology and astrophysics, and you won't want to miss it.
Amazing. Before we go, I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought to chew on. Take a hard look around your own life, right now, today. What earthbound sovereigns are operating in your world? What unproven systems, what societal expectations, what economic pressures or cultural norms are you unquestioningly obeying simply because it's mentally easier than fighting them? Whose flawed blueprint are you allowed to architect your daily reality? And most importantly, what price, what facade, what slow structural crash are you paying in your own life for that compliance? Until next time, remember the construction site. Look for the earthbound sovereigns trying to change the blueprints and demand their empirical proof.